Prepare yourself for some unhealthy build engine turbo nerd nonsense. This is Duke Nukem 3D Mapping Taboo, Episode 6, Billy Boy Windows. Although this one actually applies to other build engine games as well. If you played my custom episode for Duke Nukem 3D, you might have noticed some geometry that on the surface appears to contradict one of the fast rules we're told about this engine. This is in regards to overlapping rooms. We know that build can have rooms that exist in the same physical location. In fact, the vanilla levels do this quite a lot, but problems occur if they can see into each other, with into being the operative word. Nobody ever said anything about looking out of them into the same space. Indeed, you'll see that this window in Marine Maiming looks down into the motion sensor corridor, and we can even step through this. If we go to the floor below, this doorway also faces into that same corridor, in the same location, only slightly lower down. Turning around, we can see the texture up there representing the window above, though we can't look back through it, and cheating our way up there, we can't enter it either. From above, you can exit through the window, as we know. This is a Billy Boy window, so named for the first builder of them, a mapper who went by the handle of Billy Boy. What is curious is that I also had a map in the works for Blood at the time, and it bears a date matching the release of Billy's first map to use these. Of course, this means I was somewheres behind, but it's interesting how the same thing was discovered independently in two different games at roughly the same time. Now this leads us to some clarification that I'd like to make, which people often mess up: the difference between game and engine. Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior and Blood all use version 7 of the build engine. These games handle rather differently to each other in places, and they feature different effects. However, would you believe that the engine is really identical between them? In fact, anything that's possible in one of these games is entirely possible to do in the others. Things like Blood's room over room are entirely a game difference, which is to say, this is the game deciding when it will call the engine's room drawing functions. Things like the wall portals or the sector copy paste in Shadow Warrior could easily have existed in the other two games. Things like doors and elevators, which are implemented completely differently across the three titles, are indeed implemented at the game level of code and merely call the engine's movement and interpolation functions at different stages of the game loop. Nothing that any of these games do is an engine modification. They're simply deciding if and when the engine will be asked to do something it could always do from the get-go. As a general rule, if it's been drawn to the screen, it's probably an engine side thing and was always there. If it's interacting with things in the world, then it's more than likely a game side thing. There is some crossover between this, but yeah. Following this logic, a lot of what we've looked at has depended on Duke 3D's effects system, which means we depend somewhat on game side code as well as engine side. Today we're looking at something that's entirely engine side, so it should work in all three of these games, and we're going to have to understand a bit about how build actually draws the game world. We won't go super deep into it, and I could, and I'd probably quite enjoy doing it, but I'm not sure you would. And really, understanding even a basic level of this will make a huge difference in what you can do in your levels if you can grasp it. Are you ready for this? Here are two sectors, Sector 0 and Sector 1. They are connected by a single red wall. I know, it's not really spectacular, is it? But magical things are happening. At the most basic level, a sector is being drawn, but the engine knows that another sector is also within view, and which order to draw it in, and all of that is dependent on this one red wall. Standing in Sector 0, we can certainly see beyond that red wall into Sector 1, and now we can have fun with arrays. Arrays are fun. Everyone else does think that, right? It's not just me. Well, here's Sector 0's structure members. We can't tamper with most of them in this editor, unfortunately, but we can look at them. Our sector doesn't actually know where it is, only that it exists, it has a floor and a ceiling at a particular height, and a few properties about those things. Drawing based solely on this data, then, we'd get a single floor and ceiling extending into infinity in the XY axes. It's not very useful, but, I mean, it's drawing. The sector does know the ID of its first wall, though, stored in the aptly named wall PTR member, wall pointer. It also knows how many walls it has, as per the wall num member. If we look at the wall, which really is to say the point there on the vertex of it, we can see that it does know its XY location, and also knows the ID of the next wall, as stored in the point 2 member, which is obviously the vertex at the other end of the wall. Iterating around by the number of walls the sector has, we can visit each wall, and the engine now knows where the floor and ceiling bounds are in the XY planes. In this case, giving us a boring little square sector, but that's what we drew, and, well, that's what it's rendering, so it works. Did you spot something special about that red wall, though? Where all the other walls have a next wall and next sector member filled with -1, which is to say there's nothing there, that red wall references something else. It points to a next wall outside of Sector 0, and also to a next sector. Now, obviously both of these things pertain to Sector 1. So now we know there's another sector over there. That wall is within the camera's field of view, so that means we should be able to see the sector beyond it. Probably, as long as the height works out, and it does, because they're at the same height in this case. I am grossly oversimplifying the engine's figuring out of what's visible and what isn't, and I'm not even going to talk about things like occlusion checks. We could also get fancy and have a third sector, Sector 2, beyond this one, which will also be in view, and so, well, also gets added to the rendering stack. Build will determine the optimal order in which to draw visible sectors, then draw their ceilings and floors, then their walls to the video page. Build draws in columns starting at the screen edges, but we don't really need to know about that here. With rooms drawn, which is to say the sectors and their walls, or not, any masks and sprites are then drawn, and the video page is dumped to the frame buffer, leaving a new video page ready for the next rendering pass. This will generally come after another iteration of the game loop. If we look at Sector 1, we can see that its own red wall, as in the opposite side of Sector 0's red wall, points back to Sector 0, so facing the other way also works. We can look out of Sector 1 into Sector 0. I mean, it doesn't have to be this way, but it is, and we knew it would work, but, well, now you know what's happening to some extent, and we can use or even abuse this knowledge to our advantage. We have learned that the walls are actually the magic that causes neighbouring sectors to draw them, and that's what people mean when referring to portals in this engine. The wall is the portal to or from a neighbouring sector, as far as rendering's concerned. Oh, will he use a Billy Boy? Does it all make sense now? Or doesn't it? Well, looking through the doorway, which comprises Sectors 0, 1 and 2, their red walls make reference to the start of the corridor in Sectors 522, 526 and 527. The engine knows we're facing the far end of the corridor, so forms a rendering queue around which direction we're looking and does all the magic stuff we just talked about and then some. From the corridor side, nothing references the window frame of the room above, so it's never going to draw that room up there, and so it can't interfere with the room we're in, even if we face in the opposite direction, as, well, nothing references it, so there's no way to draw it from here. When we look out of the upper window, the red wall's linking it to the corridor at the edge of the sectors 155, 156 and 157. They reference next sectors 522, 526 and 527, which we already know are the start of the corridor. The red walls there do of course reference the doorway in the other direction as noted before, but we're facing away from it, and by the time the engine gets to that stage, it's just never going to visit sectors in the opposite direction. That is to say, it has no reason to visit sectors behind a portal it's already looking out of, as it would have already visited them, or they're outside of the player's field of view. The engine will therefore ignore the next sector of those walls and instead continue onwards down the corridor till it reaches the end, where there's a white wall with a next sector of -1, which figures as there's null space beyond it, so there'd be nothing to draw beyond there. Once again, the rendering queue is formed, ordered and drawn. Never can you be facing towards the doorway from this side of the window, so the inside of the doorway and the room beyond can never draw at the same time. You could, of course, make geometry that would cause this to be true, but unless you were very careful with splitting sectors, and it is entirely doable if you want to put the time in, you might not like the results very much, though it does have its uses. By now, you've probably figured out that red walls only have a single entry for their next sector, and therefore can reference only one other sector. In our case, that's the doorway when facing from the corridor rather than the window. Ergo, we see only the doorway and not the window. Curiously, the engine could handle changing this property at run time, but the game has no facility to do this. I'll let you figure out why this might be useful if it did have such a feature in the game's effects system, and it's worth remembering that build can actually move sectors at run time, which a lot of engines couldn't do, so yeah, this could be very, very fun if this was implemented. But, alas, the game in its vanilla form has no such feature, and so we're stuck with engine-only features for today. That isn't to say you couldn't combine the effects the game does have implemented with the tricks we're doing today. Oh, certainly you could do that, and, well, creativity's the limit. It's all up to your imagination from here. This level actually does have another set of Billy Boy windows farther on, and the same rules apply to them as the corridor. I could go on, and we'll return to some uses for them later, but now I expect you want to know how to build the damn things yourself, and I'm going to show you. So, here's a really ugly version of our corridor. It's simplified so it's easier to follow. We have a room for upstairs and a room for downstairs that are currently not connected to it. We have to decide which thing wants to be two-way and which thing wants to be one-way, and also which way that should be going. What we want here is a setup that behaves like my trap corridor, so we'll need to take the upstairs room and connect it to the corridor. That part's perfectly normal, we're just dragging sectors into place. Now take the lower room and also drag that over to connect it. You might have to click the points to make the wall turn red again. That's entirely it. When you bring over this second room, its doorway's walls get updated to reference the corridor. The corridor, in turn, has its walls updated to reference this doorway. The room above doesn't have its walls updated and still references the corridor. In fact, there's no real limit to how many walls can reference the same next wall and next sector, so we could stack a third room on here if we wanted to, or even more. Just remember that whichever room you want to be able to pass both ways, in and out of, has to be the last thing you connect. The caveat here is you'll need an older build editor, as the dummies who maintain Mapster obviously think their user base are idiots for some reason, and don't allow you to abuse wall connections like this. You might also recall my remarks about them locking out members in the menus. Furthermore, you may have discovered that some ports render black where your window is. In any case, no matter who's right or wrong here, and I think it's pretty easy to determine which is which, your map is now technically corrupt, and you should expect a warning to appear in the editor, even if you are running in expert mode with a bunch of checks disabled, which is what you should be doing. I'd recommend leaving Billy windows until near the end of building your map. You can always place teleporters into your level temporarily so you can test despite the room's been disconnected halfway across the board somewhere, waiting to be moved into place later. Now, for the cool part that some of you may be asking, and I'm betting most of you probably missed completely: height. What are the rules for height? Well, there aren't any. In fact, you can have a window in a totally nonsensical location where it couldn't possibly exist. Somewhere in mid-air or below the floor. Completely possible. The latter probably isn't very useful unless you intend to lower the floor or raise the window, but I mean, you can do it. You can have windows in just about any arrangement, and this is one way of achieving transparent water that you can look out of. Notice the monster is entirely visible when we go below the water here. The above water and below water are separate sectors, but the room around them isn't. That is to say, both the above and below water sectors both look into the same room, but the room only looks into the above water sector. Where it gets extremely fun is that multiple windows can be at the same height, in the same place. This is how I teleport the player without actually teleporting them in Dimensional Disaster. The player doesn't move here, the doorway is simply linked into by two different sectors. Does the same thing in Secret Slaughter. Similarly, The mirror here reflects a sector you aren't in that exists at the same XYZ positions because its frame is looked into by both sectors. You can only look out of one. Hey, wait a minute, isn't this technically drawing two rooms in the same place at once? Well, no, they're drawn at different times. You see, the camera is not the player, and in fact mirrors are an entirely separate rendering pass which happens before the main rendering pass. Between frames, the camera is moved away from the player to a position behind the mirror, relative to the player's position and angle in front of the mirror. Rooms are drawn, masks are drawn, and the image is X-flipped on the video page. Though curiously, the unflipped version does remain on the page. I guess there's no reason to clear it because, well, the main rendering pass will happen next, usually from the player's position, and now the rooms and masks are drawn over the video page, except where the mirror is. The mirror is actually a hole that draws nothing, but because we already drew from a camera looking out of the mirror and flipped it onto this page, that part of the image remains, and well, there's your reflection. It's like a double exposure on a film. Both rooms do exist in the same place, but they're not drawing simultaneously. They're only being drawn to the screen simultaneously, which is different. Rendering computer graphics is so easy and fun, isn't it? If it helps, my logo uses 4 rendering passes, although one of them isn't doing anything because it was meant for a CPU flyby under the text, which I didn't like. Obviously it takes time to draw things, so the more passes you have, the slower things will run. You could theoretically have as many as you wanted and draw some very complex things that aren't even possible in the real world and indeed aren't easily possible in most other engines. In fact, in Build, you don't even have to draw to the screen. You could draw to an art tile. Yeah, that's how view screens work. And you might notice they don't run at full frame rate because this isn't actually very fast. Also, this is how save games work. Oh wait, that means we can load art tiles at runtime from outside of the game. Well, now isn't that an interesting thought? You know, I've never looked at this in Blood's source code or what's available of it, but I've got a sneaking suspicion this might be how it does the Smacker texture playback, which is to say that it's probably using a Smacker player and just loading that to an art tile at runtime. Indeed, you can do anything. It's how the procedural water was done in Lame Duke. It's just rendering that to an art tile, which is then in the game. But again, we're getting sidetracked, and today the subject really was just the Billy Boy windows and a little bit of how the engine renders things. It really is quite a magical game engine, this thing. There's really nothing else quite like it. It's been a long time since we made one of these videos, and unfortunately maybe a long time until we make another one, but this series isn't done yet. I'm not sure where we can go from here. There's certainly other things we could talk about. Maybe we should do some door abuse next time, because well, you can certainly abuse the doors in Duke Nukem 3D and make them do things they really weren't supposed to do. But for the time being, I'm High Treason, thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that may be. I actually have a couple of closing thoughts on this one. You might have put the pieces together already, or at least have started to have this idea. You probably noticed when making levels for build games that mirrors don't contribute to the sprite drawing limit. You can usually only have 1,000 sprites on screen, but you could have 1,000 sprites and then put a mirror there, and so, well, isn't that 2,000 sprites? Well, obviously, we've discussed that. No, it's 1,000 sprites at a different time, so it's allowable. It'll draw. No problem. Also, when you're doing overlapping geometry of any kind, it quite often helps to have an offset rule. And you'll notice that for my example window corridor thing today, I moved where the points would connect to the overlapping areas just up and right by 2 units. So that means none of the other walls actually overlap, they're slightly offset. And so it's good to have a formula for that if you're going to do a lot of overlapping geometry, because you can quickly tell which room you're looking at. Of course, it's never going to be easy to work with overlapping sectors, and it's another reason you really should just do them last. Still, I think that's all I've got for you for today, so I'm High Treason, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.